Chapter 13, Strategies for Growth and Managing the Implications of Growth. So where do we look for growth opportunities? A successful new venture provides opportunity for an entrepreneur to grow their business. This chapter discusses where to look for growth opportunities, the implications of that growth, and how to negotiate for resources. Chapter 3, if you recall, showed that an entrepreneurial and organizational knowledge provided opportunities for new entry when we're trying to brainstorm and put together new opportunities. Different combinations and different levels of these types of knowledge that you build in that process create the different growth strategies, such as market penetration, market development, product development, and the diversification strategies for your product and or service. So what's a penetration strategy? Well, a penetration strategy focuses on the firm's existing product or service and its existing market. This strategy relies on taking market share from your competitors and or expanding the existing market. Marketing can be effective in encouraging more frequent repeat purchases. So the idea here is you have a product or service in the market and now you're trying to get more of the market or take market share from your competitors, and that has an awful lot to do with your market development strategies. Now, market development strategies involve selling a firm's existing products to a new group of customers or groups of customers. New groups of customers can be categorized by, let's say, a new geographical market, you're moving into a new area, a new demographic market, you're moving to a different age group or race group, or basically any way you can describe demographic. Diversification. So, or you found a new product use. Customers may use a product in unexpected ways. Once you launch, you could find out they start using it in a different way than you anticipated, which allows the producer to capitalize on the existing knowledge and modify their product or service to better meet customer satisfaction. Now, this involves some product development strategies, which involve developing and selling new products to current customers. The experience with a particular customer group is an important resource in coming up with a new product. Advantages of this strategy include capitalizing on existing distribution systems and corporate reputation. You just expanded into a new area as your product evolves. Now, this can involve some diversification strategies where you sell a new product to a new market. A value-added chain shows that the steps from raw materials to getting the product in the customer's hands, so basically the whole developmental process there, value is added at each stage, meaning things are taken from raw material to a final product that provides a solution that has value. That's the value creation through solving a problem. And then you hope that your firm makes a profit. Now, backward integration is when a firm becomes its own supplier. So you bring something in-house that used to be out of house, something you used to have a supplier for. Forward integration is the firm becomes its own buyer, in that maybe you have an intermediate product that ends up being a consumer product in the end. Both strategies provide growth opportunities and advantages. What you'll find is a lot of businesses, as they get bigger, start bringing more things in-house. Think like Amazon, which started out very small as an online college book supplier and eventually grew into this huge, diverse marketplace, and that now forward integrated into its own shipping arm. So they've cut out a good bit of the UPS, FedEx, U.S. mail dependencies by bringing in, forwardly integrating their own shipping options. Now, horizontal integration diversifies into related products. If our products are complementary, the firm will have some competencies and may increase sales of an existing product by adding complementary products to it. Unrelated diversification is almost always a mistake, and there's so many different companies that try to get into markets that have nothing to do with their core competencies, and they end up having to retreat out. Growth implications for the firm. There's pressure on human resources. That's your people. There may be morale issues. They're overworked. They're burned out. More people quit. So you have increased turnover, which can negatively impact the corporate culture. There's also pressure on the management of employees. Entrepreneurs may need to change their management style. If they will not delegate, the venture cannot grow. That's a big challenge for entrepreneurs because you're problem solvers and you rarely like to share responsibilities because you're like, I'm going to get this done right. But as the organization gets bigger and bigger, you have no choice but to delegate, which means you're very dependent on your people. So you need really good people. So you got to build culture. There's pressures on the entrepreneur's time. Time is a limited resource that must be diverted from other activities to focus on growth. So you can't get caught up in the day-to-day if you're trying to steer the ship into new waters. Pressures on existing financial resources. Financial resources become thin. There's resource slack, which is required to ensure against environmental shocks and to foster innovation. Basically, you need the capital to be able to invest into growth into new areas, which you may not make as much money as you would like, but it ultimately, long run, prolongs the lifespan of the organization. So there's stresses on your people, there's stresses on your manager, there's stresses on your time, there's stresses on your resources, your financial resources. No surprises there. So how do you overcome pressures on existing human resources, on your people? Most new ventures do not have an HR department, but can use professional employer organizations. In lieu of that, a key decision is the correct proportion of part-time employees. Part-timers offer low cost and more flexibility without the turnover, so you can kind of bring people on part-time here and there without having to make the full-time commitment. Now, eventually you have to make that full-time commitment. Now, moving on to another area, a very difficult decision is firing an incompetent employee. Providing feedback and agreeing on a solution, but continued problems may necessitate firing. This is always the toughest part of being a manager, is knowing when to let go. A lot of managers, really want their employees to succeed, and that's great. But sometimes people just aren't cut out to be doing what they should be doing, and maybe it's time to start looking at maybe God's calling them to do something else. But to be able to do this, you need to provide continuous feedback, document, and make sure that you have explored all avenues before making this type of move. The HR strategy must maintain corporate culture despite bringing in new employees, so you have to incorporate people into your culture. The entrepreneur must be a role model, but in cases of rapid growth, they may need to be a cultural ambassador. People liking where they work and who they work with is so very important to productivity in your corporate culture. Overcoming pressures on the management of employees. Managing change is complex and requires a participative style of management involving others in the decision-making process. Advantages of this management style include it reduces information processing demands on the entrepreneur because you got more help. Qualified employees find new ways to tackle current problems, which is awesome. It involves employees that are more motivated to implement decision and enhances job satisfaction because people feel like their opinions are valued. Now, activities to institute participative management: establish a team spirit and communicate well and provide feedback so everyone feels like they're on the same page. Delegate some responsibilities to others. Now that will take pressure off you, the manager, and provide continuous training for your employees so they continuously get better. I put a big emphasis on excellence here in my adventures as a manager, in that a lot of people look for success in careers, which means they do better than someone else. I'm more preoccupied with excellence, which means you do better than you did yesterday. The only person you have to be better than is you yesterday. So everyone in the organization has to find out how to get better today. And better than who? Themselves yesterday. If everybody's doing that, you're rowing in the same direction, you're going to have some success. Now, overcoming pressures on the entrepreneur's time. Time is a scarce resource. The entrepreneur benefits from practicing time management, increased productivity and job satisfaction, quality relationships, improved decision-making, and ultimately better health, both mental, physical, and emotional. The basic principles of time management are: the principle of desire requires recognition of wasted time. The principle of effectiveness requires focus under pressure. Principle of analysis shows how time is currently allocated. Principle of teamwork acknowledges the importance of delegation. And the principle of prioritized planning allocates time by category. And the principle of reanalysis requires a review of your time management. This is a continuous feedback loop that everyone needs to be doing in their lives, regardless if they're an entrepreneur or not. Because when you look at it, we're all entrepreneurs when it comes to our time. We're allocating it in certain ways, and that'll either get positive results, meh results, or negative results. I said meh. Overcoming pressures in existing financial resources, so the pressure on your financial capital. You reduce the need for new financial resources by better managing your existing resources, so you're being efficient with your dollars now. The entrepreneur must know how to provide financial controls to ensure a pro forma projections and goals are met. This is usually the biggest growth area for a lot of entrepreneurs. Some financial skills are needed to manage during the early years. The cash flows, income statement, balance sheet are key areas in needing careful management and control. You've got to understand what these things are. That's why a lot of the classes you're going through are so very important, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, in terms of making you a more effective business person. The entrepreneur must manage cash flows, inventory, fixed assets, costs, profits, and taxes. Definitely read more about that in the financial chapter as well as this chapter. Now, managing cash flow, a monthly cash flow statement shows an actual amounts next to budgeted amounts. So that tells you whether you're sticking to your budget, your plan. It's useful for adjusting pro forma statements. Sensitivity analysis may be involved. A daily cash sheet may be needed by a very new venture, in that things are so fluid at the very beginning of your business. Your projections may be way off. They may be okay. You may need to make adjustments on the fly. That's why a daily cash sheet is important. Comparison of budgeted to actual cash flows indicate daily shortfalls, or we would hope maybe excesses, and provides in managing assets and control. So it's something you get better at on a daily basis. Now, managing your inventory. Excess inventory drains cash flow because you get too much stuff sitting on the shelf, but too little may result in lost sales and create unhappy customers who then seek an alternative to you. Computerized inventory control systems maintain records and monitor key figures. A perpetual inventory system can be computerized or manual. Electronic data interchanges, so that's an EDI, allows communication between producers, wholesalers, and retailers. This is usually for a more developed new start. Efficiency consumer response, ECR, links firms to in a computerized system. A lot of your bigger retailers, if they scan something and they sell it, they know, they just went for an inventory of 15 to 14. And if you sold 10 of them, they know they just went from an inventory of 15 to 5. So one of those transactions may trigger a reorder on an automatic basis. So that's pretty cool. If you're doing this more on a manual system, when you're smaller, you definitely need to be on top of your inputs and your products on the shelves, your inventory, to know when you need to be able to reorder so that you don't have a product outage. And the transportation mode that you get these inventory, that's very important. You have to keep that in mind. How long do we have? What kind of lead time do we have to be able to order something and get it in? Managing your fixed assets. Fixed assets have costs such as maintenance and depreciation. Think like a building or equipment here. If the entrepreneur cannot afford to buy fixed assets, leasing is an alternative, and a lot of people go that route. But it depends on the terms of the lease, the type of the asset, and usage demand. Auto leases may be more expensive than purchasing due to interest and higher costs that never really actually pays off the vehicle. You just keep paying for it, for example. Lease payments are an expense and a tax deduction, so that's why you want to have one of those highly skilled accountants on there to help you with tax deductions on lease payments and depreciation on something you own. Leases are valuable for equipment that may be quickly obsolete because you can quickly move on to a newer piece of equipment without having to buy it yourself. So you can move from lease to lease. Consider all these costs and the impact on cash flows when you're managing your fixed assets. And then it leads us to managing costs and profits. Interim income statements compare actual to budget amounts and effectively establish cost standards. How close are you? How far off are you? Costs are budgeted based on a percentage of net sales. So a lot of your costs are affected on a per unit basis that you've moved out the door. So it really depends. If you're having really good sales, that obviously reduces your cost of unit per unit sold. So compare it to actual percentages to see where the cost controls are needed. As long as you're tracking it, you can find these little areas where you're losing money, and perhaps you can make an adjustment to improve your revenue versus cost and thus your profits. So this lets the entrepreneur manage costs before it's too late. You're seeing the forecast, if you will, before the storm arrives, and you can adjust accordingly. In year 2, make month-to-month comparisons with year 1. So you're looking at this January versus last January, February versus February examples. For example, when costs are much higher, determine the cause of the overrun. So why all of a sudden is this January more expensive than last January? A lot of people say, oh, this is boring. But this is where business separates itself from those that fizzle out to those who prosper and do well. Income statements, comparisons of actual budget versus or actual and budgeted expenses can be very misleading for ventures with multiple products. So make sure you're comparing apples to apples with, well, if you were selling apples, compare that to selling apples this year. If you're selling oranges, compare that to selling oranges, this next year. Make sure you're comparing things on an even keel. Taxes and record keeping, very important. Federal, state taxes must be withheld and deposited with appropriate agencies on time to avoid late payment, which would include fees and fines sometimes. Federal and state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare is withheld. Unemployment taxes and other taxes may be required. Federal and state governments require end-of-year returns. A lot of organizations about this size and bigger, we're talking about entrepreneurs, pay quarterly taxes. So that's something you don't want to wait till the end of the year and hope you did okay, because that's a great way to get in trouble with the IRS and go out of business immediately. When record-keeping software packages enhance the flow of financial information and may require an accountant, let me go ahead and tell you, get an accountant. You want a good accountant, you want a good attorney. A system for storing and using customer information becomes vitally important as the number of customers increases. A database can hold and process information. You've got to get organized sooner rather than later. Implications of firm growth for the entrepreneur. Some entrepreneurs lack the ability to transition to a more professional management style. They either lack the education or the experience. You guys are here getting the education, and the world will provide you with a bevy of experience. Others may be able but unwilling to focus on growing the firm. Hey, we just want to stay at the small store in this one town. Maybe your idea is bigger than that. Some entrepreneurs do not pursue growth as they believe it sacrifices profitability and chances of survival. It's possible, but if you stay on top of some of the numbers that we're talking about here and maintain your culture, it's pretty good chance that if you can get to this point, not only will you survive, you'll thrive if you grow appropriately. Others avoid growth so as not to yield equity or incur debt. They're just too afraid, or they don't have the management system in place. Types of entrepreneurs and their firm's growth. Entrepreneurs can be categorized into two dimensions: those with the ability to transition to a more professional management style and those with growth aspirations. I'm not saying you can keep it smaller, not become like a chain of restaurants if you have a restaurant, but those that are growth-minded and have the skill set necessary to look at things like income statements and cash flow statements and make decisions based on evidence do stand a better chance of growing more effectively. So depending on the position of the two dimensions, 4 types of firm growth outcomes are identified. Actual growth of the firm is done by entrepreneurs with both the ability to transition and the aspiration to grow their business. Entrepreneurs who possess the ability for transitions but do not aspire to do so have unused potential for growth. Now, people can consciously choose to do that. It's awesome. It's America. That's what you can do. But if you have the ability to make the transition and you have the skill set to be able to do it, you also have to have the desire to do it. Entrepreneurs who want to grow but do not possess sufficient ability are constrained by their lack of knowledge on how to grow. Those with neither the ability nor the aspirations to grow have little potential for a firm growth and thus will struggle to raise money and get further investment into their entity. And that is a very high 30,000-foot view of Chapter 13, Strategies for Growth and Managing the Implications of Growth. As always, it's not comprehensive enough to be skipping the reading, so make sure you're doing that because this chapter can help you on your final project. See you in the next chapter.